Guess what? I've got a new chair. At last. Took me long enough, but, well, here we are. Back again. Hi. Hello. How are you doing? So, like I said, I wanted to do more writing-focused videos, and here we are. Another one. For you. Yes. So I want to do a little mini series of a few videos just going on my writing process, my general creative process when it comes to writing, and hopefully, well, just, show you and connect if you're interested, and hopefully you are. So let's get into it. So this first one is going to be about outlining. How do I outline a novel when I'm going to write it? And of course, one major caveat is I haven't written shed loads of novels, so my method is subject to change sometime in the future, but I feel I've really hit my stride with this technique that I use currently. And also, just one last note before I get into the video proper, I use absolutely zero generative AI in any creative work I do, because if you do use generative AI, you are not a real artist. You are cluttering up the space with hollow shit, and it is removing the space for, people who actually put effort into their art. So, death to AI and to anyone who uses AI. Joy's on. So, what really was sort of the journey to start this off was I didn't really know how to go about writing a novel when I first started, and I'm sure that's pretty much the case with a lot of people when they first start to write. They're still trying to find their feet. A lot of it's just kind of blindly fumbling in the dark, and you're going to make a few mistakes along the way. I want to say this video is, of course, just me showing what works personally for me. It may not work for you, it probably won't, it may do, and that's good. But one bit of advice I would give is just try different things. What speaks to you as a creative? Like, what method you feel really works for you? The kind of stuff that draws you in. Take a look at different methods. Which one really speaks to you? Really fills you with sort of excitement and joy to get stuck into. Just find what stuff kind of appeals to you, to your workflow generally, and if it doesn't work, then again, just experiment from there, and you can't go wrong, because there is no wrong way to go about this. The only wrong way is what way just doesn't work for you, and I made that mistake early on. So, like I said, I didn't really know how to write a novel when I first started, and by that I meant you had an idea and you just sat down and you just wrote it. You just there. That's not how that works, obviously. I had no idea of actual outlining, revisions, drafts, and that kind of stuff. I mean, this was a long time ago, but I didn't realize any of it. And as I have learned that, oh yeah, you can do outlines and structure things in nice, pretty cool and neat ways that really appeals to my autistic brain, and it suddenly goes oh, this is fun. I like this. I want to do more. So yeah, I kind of started as basically the purest form of a pantser. So for those who aren't familiar with that term, usually there's a vague, rough spectrum that novelists and story writers sit on, of basically you're either a plotter or a pantser. Plotters, as the name implies, are people who like to, plot things out. They like to have a structured plan, have all of as many kinks as possible worked out from the beginning, just lay things out very in a structured, neat way, have a direct pathway to go through. Whereas a pantser is basically someone who flies by the seat of their pants. They feel stifled by rigid pathways and structures that plotters tend to prefer, and they prefer to do something more in the realm of discovery writing, is what it's called, where they just let the words flow out of you, and then they all just refine it later, basically. Some of my friends are pantsers, many well-known novelists are pantsers, Stephen King, pretty much, that's how he writes. But I found early on that was not me at all. And that is mainly one of the main reasons why my first novel, The Blue Sun, took so long to get the first draft finished, is because I would just sit down, I try to write, get stuck, get frustrated, and give up for a few months. Then a few months later, come back to it, and cycle repeats. But then I honed my craft, well, tried to, and this is what I'm tending to go for in the ways forward. So where do ideas even come from at the start? Many story ideas tend to have their start as usually just like weird dreams I have. That is like the main inspiration for a lot of my story ideas, and usually it can be something simple as just a single scene, or there's sort of like a general... Your dreams are mostly just kind of incoherent anyway to begin with, but then your mind tries to recontextualize it into a way that makes sense. And at least mine does, and from there it feels like a really cool story idea, even though it will probably, in the moment of the dreams, being just completely out there nonsensical, but then taking it and reforming it into something actually coherent. So I have a document. I'll probably put a thing up on there, just a demonstration, just all my general ideas, something just as simple as like a little like blurb, flavor text, and I usually understand and know the rest from there, but I tend to just keep it vague because that's just what I have a tendency to do. Because I know what it means, and surely everyone must know. And from there, even before it gets onto paper or onto a Word document or whatever, it stews over in my head a lot, and a lot of developments and refinements do come from that introspection and those developments from there in the mind, so that by the time it actually gets to writing it down, a lot of significant kinks, or at least the general shape of the story, is already more or less formulated. You know, like these are ideas that stew around in my head for years and years before it actually gets written, so they've been through a lot of pre-revisions even before it's... But generally that is the process of tying things together into a coherent story. And once it is tied together into the beginnings of what could be considered a coherent story, I then make a bullet point list of the plot points. So there's several different levels of refinement and story and plot detail I go through. Typically I will start off with a full plot synopsis, so typically the kind of thing that you may submit to an agent who requests a synopsis of your novel, something that just runs through all the plot points in about 500 words or so, but something like that, just a really basic summary of everything that happens, the general cause and effect of everything, just so that it, you know, makes sense. So for an example, in The Blue Sun, my first novel, which is still being written, by the way, if anyone's wondering why it's not out yet, although there are samples available of me reading it on the channel if you want to have a look at that if you're interested. This outline was basically structured and written out while I was still writing the first draft, because of course for obvious reasons beforehand. I started with that structure, the little synopsis thing, and then from there the bullet point list, where you can go into more detail and really just define the chapter by chapter actions and happenings and the cause and effect that goes on from there. Because that's one of the main significant aspects of storytelling, is that there's always got to be cause and effect. That's a general like plot idea. And with that, there's also, of course, the characters. So I'm going to go more into depth on how I develop my characters in the next video, in the series next week, but it's going to be, after that, then little sort of rough character profiles, and I mean quite rough early on, because I have, you know, the general idea of what these want to be, and a lot of the extra context is in my head anyway, that it just needs to jog my memory for it. But these are pretty, again, base level, just like a paragraph or so describing this character, their characteristics, their motivations, their personal flaws and that, and their relationship with the other characters in the story. Remember with having long hair, it gets absolutely everywhere. And also beyond that is a few plot points or paragraphs about the setting, which is another thing I will go into in a later video. And usually once it's there and it's laid out, I then go over it again and again before I actually get into writing the story proper. So this is just a brief little example of an outline I've done for my second novel, Never Human. I've changed everything to an unreadable font, so nobody can, well, hopefully nobody will be able to steal this, but so again, like I said, synopsis, the plot, so Act 1, general plot points divided into each Act 2, then Act 3, then a rough chapter by chapter plan. So this is me really refining my outlining process for this novel from what I learned from The Blue Sun. So just go further down here, and so here's characters again. Everything's sort of, so character's name, their age. Again, hopefully you won't be able to read this shit, but so each of the different characters. Then setting. I don't think I need to hide this, but again, just a very brief thing, just outlining the setting basically. And then after that, I'll go to there, so you can't do that. But draft 0 from there is when I will start writing it proper, which I will get to a bit later in the video. So hopefully you enjoy there. Hopefully this clears it up. I have this really bad habit of just not letting myself write messy first off. I'm a very slow writer generally, and that's because I have such a strong quality filter preloaded in. Even though I know for a fact what I am writing in this moment is not the best it can be, or not the best it will be, it has to be the best I can make it in that moment. Otherwise, it's going to play in my mind, and I can't resist going back into editing function and changing it, and then you get stuck in a loop and you never get anywhere. And even then, there's stuff you may not notice and beta readers will notice again, but that often can be quite frustrating, having to, rewrite significant chunks of the story. But I haven't had to deal with that yet, although I most definitely will at some point, because I know I will. Any significant plot holes, anything that you feel doesn't work, or just from a pure logical perspective doesn't work. The novel that I'm working on after The Blue Sun, I'm working on 2 novels simultaneously, because of course I am. Without spoiling too much, one of the major plot points surrounded time travel. Trouble with time travel, especially with what I was doing, is basically going back and undoing certain errors, is that it takes all of the real weight out of the consequences, because you basically just have an undo button. That whole side of things, or that basically undo button level time travel, I just completely cut that out and just got rid of that plot point altogether. I then had to work something out elsewise, and that was all done in the outlining process. Looking it over, reading it over, getting some feedback from some writing friends, and working something else out that works a little better. And then once that's all done, the bullet points, the skeleton of the story is laid out and understood, and the characters, their functions in that story, the setting, once all of that is more or less set in stone, then I can begin draft 0. So draft 0, technically some people may call it a first draft. I'm calling it a draft 0 because I can. This is, like I said, I struggle with writing messy, but this is me just giving the excuse to just get it onto paper and write as messy as it needs to be. It allows me to at least sort of get over the mental hurdle of writing linearly, which is a habit I've quite hard to break. I always like to work through things linearly. This one lets me work through things in a non-linear way. Basically, when certain scenes are at the forefront of my mind that I want to write them, I write them, and I can stitch it all together later. And if there's certain aspects of a scene that I am struggling with the details of, or the actions, I can just do a quick little summary and then fill in the blanks later. Usually something I'll use square brackets, and I'll highlight it in yellow on Microsoft Word as basically just expand the details. This is sort of what I want to say in this bit here. We can expand on this later when I come back around to it for the first proper draft. So the main process is really just building a very rough skeleton and then slowly building it up more and more as you go. The way I like to say it is putting the meat onto the bones to building it into a truly, fleshed out story. Pun very much intended. And of course, aside from everything, there's always going to be issues that you yourself as the writer are too close to the story to see and understand, which is always more important than anything to get beta readers. If you are struggling to find beta readers, look for a local writers group or anything. Just find fellow writers and, make those connections. Even if you're not a sociable person, just do it, because trust me, it's so much better. Don't just rely on paying people on Fiverr to read your story. Just get people who understand that thing. You know, you shouldn't have to worry about the more in-depth stuff, but that's sort of like a different thing. You just want general feedback in regards to, like, does this story fully work? And are there any major plot holes I'm missing? And more important than anything, I find, is that do characters feel as fleshed out as they need to be? Their motivations make sense, their actions make sense, and, you know, that general thing like that. But we will get more into characters in the next video, of course, which I'll see you in for that next week. But anyway, hope you enjoyed this rambly as usual video of mine. I've actually written some notes down for this one to try and be more coherent, but anyway. But I hope you have enjoyed this video, and I hope you enjoy the next couple of ones to come up and give you the little insight into my mind. And I'll see you later. Au revoir.